Good evening, everyone. We would like to welcome you to the Houston Metropolitan Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated Human Trafficking Summit, Part 1. Our theme this evening is Delta Stopping Traffic, and we are so excited to have these great panelists that are going to talk about what human trafficking looks like in our communities, how we can change the narrative and protect our youth. And I'll keep my introduction pretty short this evening, and I'm going to turn it over to our chapter president, Sarah Kendra Lacey, who's going to give us a welcome.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Sarah Jasmine. I would first like to acknowledge all of our guests that we have on online with us tonight. We are certainly elated to have Sheriff Fagan from Fort Bend County. We are certainly happy to have Representative Theory, Ms. Roberts, let's see, Detective Fortson, and Tyler Cunning. They are going to bring you a well of knowledge and information about human trafficking, what that looks like, and then what you can do to participate in the awareness and action against human trafficking in our world. And so I'm looking forward to hearing more from these panelists. I'm excited, and I hope you are ready to get something and be engaged. Thank you. Everybody have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Sarah President, for those words of welcome. Our very first speaker this evening is Eric Fagan. He is the newly elected sheriff of Fort Bend County. And so we're going to dive right in. We know you have a short window with us this evening, but we're really excited to have you here. So before we dive into some questions, can you tell us what your platform was when you ran for office as it relates to human trafficking?
Well, my platform first was to address human trafficking head on. The former administration made a statement that human trafficking didn't exist in Fort Bend County or gangs didn't exist here. That to me was putting your head in the sand. Human trafficking is all over the U.S. And right here in Fort Bend County, we have two major freeways, 59 and I-10. That's a major thoroughfare for the human traffickers. So once I took office, I wanted to address that head on.
And what kind of challenges have you seen so far as you've started to tackle human trafficking? Were you expecting some of those challenges, or do you have any new insights now that you've been in the role for a couple of months?
Well, the challenge is how enormous it is. Just this past February, we put on an operation called Operation Cupid, where we arrested over 30 predators, human traffickers, right here in Fort Bend County. And we were blessed to rescue a 15-year-old child from the human trafficking. This child was trafficked from Dallas, from the Dallas County. Trafficking comes in a lot of different forms. A lot of people think it's just sexual, but no, it's not. We also have labor traffic. And what that is individuals who are indentured to people. They take away their passports and make them work for less than minimum wage. So it's all forms of human trafficking all over in suburban areas as well as rural areas as well.
I'm really glad that you brought that up. I think a lot of people, when they think about human trafficking, sometimes they only think of sex trafficking, or sometimes they think it only happens in the cities, but Fort Bend is a suburban area. Can you expound a little bit on what the differences are, or is it almost exactly the same as what people might think about when they think about trafficking in a Houston or a Dallas or a larger metroplex?
Well, when you think about human trafficking, you have to realize that it's a billion-dollar industry. I'm sad to say that, but it is. And our victims of human trafficking are a lot of times are very young children. And the reason for that is this: that young child to them is a commodity, something that they can use over and over again. Human trafficking is really predominant in all races. Like 20% of victims are white females, 40% Black females. In the labor union, 63% of it is Hispanic, 17% Asian. Most confirmed suspect of human traffickers are male, 81% male traffickers. But don't be fooled. We also have women who are human traffickers as well. So we have to be on the lookout for everything. And what's more pervasive now is human trafficking online. We have to be aware of that, cyber human trafficking. The criminals are using innovative things. So we in law enforcement must be more innovative and be more proactive and progressive in our attack against this hideous crime.
Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the innovations that you and your office have started to think about or put into action as it relates to human trafficking?
Yes, the second day in office, I joined the task force called HETRA, Human Trafficking Rescue Alliance, with the Houston Police Department. I joined that alliance so we can work together. Also, I joined in with our district attorney, Brian Middleton, to attack this because it has to be a collaborative force. Human trafficking crosses all boundaries. We can't look at it as just Missouri City or Sugar Land or Houston. It crosses all boundaries. So we all have to work together. Not only law enforcement, but we need individuals in the community, like your sorority. I'm so happy that you're doing this, that are interested and are willing to work for people to rescue these individuals. A lot of people look at the victims as criminals. We have to change our mindset. These people who you want to call prostitutes or things like that, majority of the time they are victims. They're taken away from their homes and they're forced into this labor. So we in law enforcement have to look at it differently. And we need the public's help to do that. We can't do it on our own. So you need to be on the lookout for things like people coming to a certain house and all you see are male cars coming there, nothing else but a bunch of cars coming and it's just males. Or you see their windows are covered up with sheets, or they have burglar bars and the burglar bars are not on the inside, but they're on the outside and the lock is on the outside. That's odd. That's something that if you see that, you need to report it. If it looks strange, it's possibly that it is strange. Human trafficking is all over, and we have to be innovative and work together with the community and law enforcement to combat it.
No, that's really good. I'm glad you brought up the fact that trafficking victims, that's what they are. They are victims. They're not the criminals. And we know when we define human trafficking or define consent in the state of Texas, and we're looking at people who are 17 years of age and younger. What are some of the differences in the approaches when you're looking at a minor versus someone that is trafficked that is of age? What kind of challenges do you see there?
That is when we have to do more investigation, because we know the majority of the time that they are victims. If they're 13 or 30, it doesn't matter. They're still a victim, and we have to treat them as such. Human trafficking is a hideous crime. We've rescued people as young as 10 years old that was in the trafficking. And understand this, they're not all the time females. There are males that are being trafficked as well. So we have to look at it differently. And I'm glad that you noticed that the victims don't necessarily have to be at the juvenile age. Our victims come in all ages, and we have to recognize that as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I don't know if we have any questions yet in the chat, but I will bring that up. We have a few more minutes with you. So if anybody that lives in Fort Bend County or has any thoughts or comments, feel free to drop those in the chat. And we have a few more minutes with the sheriff, and he can address those in our final moments with him. My next question for you is, you alluded to it when we're talking about what we see on the streets, but in our households, what type of advice or what advice would you give parents or teachers or caregivers on how to identify trafficking among the people that they care for, or their friends, or in school, what would you tell parents?
What I would tell parents is to be more nosy. Be engaged with your children. Look at their Facebook friends. Look at their posting. If someone is asking them to come meet them at the mall or things, this is what traffickers do. They want to meet them at a mall or an excluded place, somewhere where there's exclusion. But the kid think, oh, it's a mall, it's real public. No, it's not. They'll get you there and they'll take you away. They'll offer you little gifts and things like that. Uh, Pay attention to your child. Pay attention if they are being less attentive to schoolwork. Pay attention if they're always online or they want to be secretive about who their new friends are. You want to know that. I think they call these, have little funny names. They don't give real names, or they have these little icons.
Insta accounts.
Yes, yes. You need to pay attention to that. You need to pay attention to that. But I hope the human traffickers are looking at this as well, and I'm pretty sure that they are. But know this, human traffickers, we have a cyber unit that sometimes you might be thinking you're talking to a victim, but you could be talking to a law enforcement officers. This last arrest we made that off a line for these people they thought they were coming to pick up a girl, and they met an officer and they were arrested. Am I afraid to let them know that? No, I'm not, because that way they will stop doing it, but I know they won't. So please keep doing that. And one day you might be actually talking to me thinking you're talking to a 13-year-old little girl.
Yes, and actually one of our panelists this evening, I won't spoil all of it for our viewers, but that's part of the work that she does, and I'll allow her to elaborate on that, where they have gone on some of the websites and into the chat rooms and had conversation with potential buyers or traffickers. And I couldn't do that job. That sounds terrifying, but it's important, and it's good. It's a good way to get information about what types of terminology they're using. So if you hear, your child using it, we can share that information with you all, with the public as well. So that's really good. We're excited about hearing that. We have one question. What do you do if you think a house or apartment has a lot of trafficking? I'm guessing that's where we're going with that.
Contact your law enforcement agency in that area and tell them what you see and tell them what you expect. We'll do the investigation. We don't want you to do the investigation. Just tell us what you see and then let us handle that. But if you see that, inform us. It's a saying, if you see something, say something. And one more thing I want to say to the parents, pay attention how your children are dressing. A young girl, all of a sudden now they want to wear lipstick and makeup. Never wanted to do that before. They want to change their dress, their clothing, and that's a sign to look at it. Who's telling them to do that? Why are they doing that? Ask questions, be engaged. If you do that, you can help a whole lot.
That's really good advice. And some of the items that you're mentioning, sometimes that's just typical teenage behavior too. And so it can be hard to identify whether or not this is a teenager just being a teenager, or if there's something more serious going on. But the key thing that you said is ask questions.
Ask questions.
Get invasive, because a child that just wants to look cute for a picture is going to tell you that, or at least you can get them to say that,
right.
Versus them, hiding because I'm doing it for, a boyfriend that could be a potential trafficker. So that's really good. We have two more questions. Hoping you can stick around for those two. How do you identify a recruiter?
A recruiter is someone, all of a sudden, they want to do favors for the victim. That's called grooming. They're being real nice at first, want to buy you clothing because they want to change your dress, what I was alluding to at first. They want to change your hairstyle. They want to buy you different pairs of shoes and things like that. They're grooming that person. They'll start telling them, hey, look, I can make you a model. That's one real key word there. I want to make you a model. That's a key word to look out for. But they'll start doing little things. And when they start trying to get them to stay away from their other friends and from their family members, trying to pull them away, pay attention to that. Invite the new boyfriend to come have dinner with you. If they don't want to do that, that's a sign. Pay attention to just little things you can pay attention to. If the person is 5 more years older than your child, that's not really good. And to each his own. But to me, 5 years, no. We shouldn't have that. So pay attention to those type of things. You want to meet the other person's parents. If the person is driving a car that's like a 17-year-old or 18-year-old having a Mercedes Benz, come on now, really? You look at just looking for little things like that. I'm not saying that they can't have it, but pay attention. You want to meet the parents, see if that's true or not.
No, that's really great advice. And the last question is kind of tied towards the court system and punishment. So I'm going to try to combine these two questions. So one question is around what are the courts doing? We know, you are the sheriff, and so that may be more so on the district attorney's office and the legal system on that side. But also, it seems that some people don't think that the punishments fit the crimes right now. And if you don't quite get to that, we actually do have another panelist that can talk about that, working on legislation to change that. But definitely just looking for what are the courts doing? I know you probably work really closely with the DA. So how does that system work?
Well, here in Fort Bend County, our DA, Brian Middleton, is doing a great job. And we're talking to the DA and judges also to do divergent things for the people, because we know that they're victims. Now, the perpetrators, we want to put harsh penalties on them. And when they cross county lines, we can put federal penalties on them with greater. But the victims, the young ladies that are trapped, we're doing things for them, having divergent courts, helping them get counseling. They need counseling and things like that. So our court system here in Fort Bend are doing great things. My DA is doing great things. And the representative that's in front of you now, she's doing great things as well to help the victims, because they know that they are victims. And you need to keep voting in people like that understand these things. So thank you again for having me. I really do appreciate it. I do have to break off right now because I'm like 2 minutes late. So
no problem. Thank you for spending that time with us. We definitely appreciate it. And we're going to dive in a little bit deeper. Thank you, Sheriff Fagan. You have a great evening.
You too.
All righty. No, that was a really good conversation with the sheriff, and you all are asking some really good questions. I hope everybody's getting something out of it so far. So right now we're going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. First, we have Tyler Cunning. He is the outreach specialist for United Against Human Trafficking. Next, we have Caroline Roberts. She is the staff attorney for Children at Risk. And Representative Sean Theory, she's a state representative for District 146. And last but not least, our Sarah Monica Fortson, she's a detective with the Houston Police Department. And just a reminder for everyone, we are still taking questions. We have a diverse panel, and so feel free to chime in with questions as you deem necessary. Give us 1 second. Okay, welcome everyone. Hope everybody's doing well today. So Tyler, we're gonna start with you. You're an outreach specialist for United Against Human Trafficking. Tell us about what you do day in and day out, what United Against Human Trafficking is doing as it relates to combating trafficking in the Houston area.
Yeah, so first I just want to thank you and your sorority for inviting me to speak on the panel tonight. And a little bit about myself, or about my organization, United Against Human Trafficking. We go out into the community and we just raise awareness about human trafficking, and we come across survivors or victims of human trafficking, and we assist them in any way possible. We specifically right now are really trying to target underserved communities. So that means communities that are people that are experiencing homelessness, minority communities, since they have a higher chance of being vulnerable to human trafficking, non-English speaking communities, and other underserved and marginalized communities. So on a day-to-day basis, we're out on the streets speaking to people about human trafficking, letting them know about their rights, letting them know about human trafficking and how it is affecting this area, because a lot of people don't know that Houston is actually a hub city for human trafficking.
And why do you think that people don't know about human trafficking and the impact it has in the Houston area? Do you think it's just a lack of, I mean, it's obviously a lack of knowledge, but do you have any idea of what could be contributing to just kind of some of the blindness that we see from some individuals?
Yeah, I think, like you said, most of it just comes from lack of education, but some of it also probably, in my opinion, stems from the media. When you watch movies and things like that, people think of human trafficking as how it's portrayed in movies and in the media, which is like a white van is going to pull up and snatch you up and snatching up kids and things like that, when that's rarely the case. Although that does take place, most of the time human trafficking takes place through someone that you know. It can be a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a husband, parents, peers. We've seen all different types of ways that human trafficking takes place. And so when people think of, oh, human trafficking means a white van pulling up in the middle of the night, grabbing you, and that's the only thing that they think of, they're like, oh, that doesn't happen here. I don't hear anything about that happening here. That just happens on movies, or oh, that just happens in, third world countries and things like that.
Yep, yeah, and I think the movie portrayal in the media definitely has an impact on just what people think. And I mean, I think we can all be honest that that's kind of where we thought before we got the knowledge. So we are going to turn it over to Representative Theory. Representative Theory, if you're ready, we can jump to you. Looks like you have a scheduling change. Good evening, and so we're going to allow you time to have the floor, and we want to hear from you as it relates to what's going on in the state capitol right now as it relates to human trafficking. We know that you've sponsored several bills, working on some legislation. Give us a rundown of all of that.
Sure. Good evening. First, I just would like to thank you, Ms. Turner. I believe you're also my constituent from House District 146. Is that correct?
I am. Yes.
Yes. So very, very proud that we are representing the district. And I want to thank Delta Sigma Theta sorority for having me speak tonight. So very, very honored and proud to be here with you on this really, really critical issue. I have been working on this issue of human trafficking and child sex exploitation for quite some time. This is my third session in the Texas legislature. And last session, I had a bill that I was hoping would make it across the finish line, but we got some stops. And so I want to talk a little bit about that tonight. And what it will do will really help protect child victims of human trafficking. And so I wanted to educate everyone who's listening tonight about the current state of how we treat minors in our law enforcement system, our juvenile justice system. You touched on that a little bit earlier when you said, well, how are people treated who are maybe 14 or 15? And unfortunately, in the state of Texas, they are treated as perpetrators instead of victims. Right now, a 15-year-old girl who is being sexually assaulted, raped, and exploited by a pimp or any other person is treated as a prostitute in the state of Texas. She can be arrested and prosecuted and go to jail for being a prostitute, even if she is 14 years of age. And so the first piece of legislation, I'll kind of show you all the one-pager on this, is HB 162. And that is titled Protecting Child Victims of Sexual Assault and Human Trafficking. And what this is trying to do, or hopefully will do, is end the criminalization of child victims. And I've said it over and over again, children are not prostitutes, point blank, period. if there is any adult having sex with a child for financial purposes or otherwise, that person is a rapist and a pedophile, and the child is a victim. So what the bill first does is it would prohibit the prosecution of children under the prostitution statute. That's a very archaic way to approach the situation, as we all, I think, agree tonight. So under the bill, the very first thing that would happen is law enforcement who would encounter any child that they believe is engaging in sexual activity with an adult or is being exploited, that the officer would immediately take the child into her or his custody, the officer. So they wouldn't just leave the child where they are. They're not going to leave them in the hands of the human trafficker or the pimp or whoever this pedophile is. They would take the child into their custody, which they already have the authority to do. The second step that the officer would do is to contact DFPS, that's the Department of Family and Protective Services. DFPS will then connect the child with a local care coordinator. This program is already established, it's already funded. And so the child will assign a caseworker to that child. Once they're with the child care coordinator, they immediately start processing the child's needs. So they would get them the medical care that they need, counseling, psychological help, and housing. And so we start to then give the provision of services that they need for rehabilitation and so that they can be well. And so this is a long-term treatment program that we've put together, and it's ultimately to send the message that children should not be criminalized. Right now in the state of Texas, a child already is presumed that they cannot consent to sex. So it's just incredulous to me that we have that in the law, but at the same time, we're arresting them for something that they don't have the ability to consent to in the first place. I'll pause if you have some questions. I have another piece of legislation as well I wanted to share with you all. But one thing about this, HB 162, it's very time sensitive. On Monday, in the Texas legislature, I will be laying out this bill for the Juvenile Justice and Family Issues Committee. And so it's a public hearing. You can register and you can log in on the website and watch it online. You can call all of the state representatives. You can email them. You can email all the members of that committee and tell them, I support Representative Theory's bill. Please pass it favorably out of the committee. That is how this process works. That is how we pass bills. If I get the bill out of the committee, I can then bring it on the House floor for a vote for the entire House of Representatives. If I pass it out of the House, I go and I do the same thing over the Senate and get it to the governor's desk. And so it's really, really important. I think people really don't think about it that way, but if you really stop and consider, why on earth would we be arresting the victim? You know, why on earth would we be prosecuting children? And so that is what this bill does. And so I don't know, Jasmine, you're the moderator. Would you like me to pause or pivot and go to the next piece of legislation? But this one is definitely kind of hot off the press in the sense that we have the hearing on Monday. The other bill that I have, we'll be getting a hearing on that one probably in the next week or two.
Okay, we have one question. I think it ties maybe better with this question. I have a little bit of some information about the next piece of legislation. So I'll ask this one first. Someone wants to know how social workers can help with human trafficking or some of what you were discussing about children really being criminalized. Like, how do we, is there a tie for social workers in that space?
Well, I would imagine that some social workers may be already in partnership and work in collaboration with DFPS. So they will probably be part of that care team. But just as you've heard before tonight, if they see something, say something, they're obviously, they have the ability, and it's not just social workers, school teachers, counselors. If you see something, report it to law enforcement. But a lot of people don't realize that we have a child sex trafficking prevention team in the state of Texas. It is funded by statute. It took a while to get it completely rolled out, but now there are local care coordinators in every county in the state of Texas that are equipped to deal with this issue. And so it's a matter of piecing it all together and sending the children to the right place. Why would we put them in the penal system? There's no need for that. I heard people say when I first started working on this, well, I mean, that's better than doing nothing, just put them in jail because at least they wouldn't be with the trafficker. Well, what happens is the trafficker goes and bails them out the next day and puts them right back into that life. And there's been no way to help the child. And so what this does, it says, no, we're going to take custody of the child. We're going to apprehend the child, but we're not going to violate their constitutional rights by charging them with a crime that they don't have the mens rea or the ability to commit. We're going to extend the provision of services necessary to help these victims. These are rape victims. These are victims of sexual assault. And it is time that we use the right language and the right verbiage. And the people that are patronizing children for sex, they are not just Johns, they are pedophiles. And we've got to approach this the right way.
When you use that language and say they are pedophiles, everybody's ears kind of perk up. It's a little bit more of it's kind of a reality check for people. And so I think
absolutely that's right, Jasmine. I mean, this is real. You know, I've been talking about this now for, you know, a few years, and I started to realize that people really hadn't really thought about it that way. You know, and I can't imagine why. And I think that we look back at it and, you know, maybe the state is embarrassed, you know, that that we've approached it this way. And it's not just the state of Texas. This is something that needs to happen across the country. There are states that have passed similar legislation, which I'm trying to pass now, but nationwide, this is still being allowed. And I think there's going to come a time when we look back on it and say, can you believe, you know, decades ago, they used to arrest children for prostitution? They called children crazy. Yeah.
Wow. I know we only have a couple more minutes with you. So I believe the next bill you want to discuss is House Bill 1655, the SMART Act.
Yes. Yes. So right now, sorry, I'm getting little notifications on my screen. Right now, there's another big hub where a lot of this takes place, and that is in the strip clubs, sexually oriented businesses, massage parlors, strip clubs, whatever you want to call these. We call them SOBs. I like to use the acronym for something else, but it actually technically, when it comes to them, it stands for sexually oriented businesses. Right now in the state of Texas, you can be 18 and get on a pole and strip, take all your clothes off, and then be taken in a back room and be raped and put in a truck and driven around and tied up and be gone from your family for a year as someone continues to sexually exploit you. We are trying to change that and make sure that you have to be a complete adult, which is 21 in the state of Texas. You have to be 21 to drink alcohol. You now have to be 21 in the state of Texas to smoke cigarettes. I don't think many of the Delters here on the Zoom tonight and anyone else listening would believe that you can be 18 and strip and take all your clothes and work in a sexually oriented business. So the SMART Act is to ensure that there's consensus across the board that you should be 21. I'd like to say 91, but I don't think that would pass. But you have to be 21 to work in a sexually oriented business. And you would need to be 21 to be on the premises.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that you had to be 21 or you could be 18 to enter a strip club. I thought it was 21, but
yeah, you can actually be 18 and serve drinks and strip there and work in that business.
Oh, wow.
But you can't drink the alcohol, but you can take off all your clothes. But you couldn't sip the wine, but you could pour the wine and you take off all your clothes and get stripped and get risk of being raped. You can do that, but you have to be 21 to drink the beer that's there. So it's really, again, another one of those things that's kind of incredulous to think about. And I hope that after HB 1655 is passed, people will look back and say, remember when they used to let 18-year-olds, work in strip clubs? Like I said, you have to be 21 now to smoke a cigarette. but we're still allowing 18 and 19-year-olds to put themselves at risk and work in this environment. And we know from what we've heard tonight, there's high levels of manipulation and mind control that's used on our young people. And so what this does is hopefully try to buy them a little time, you know, to where they're a little bit older and perhaps their life situation has changed and they're in a better position to make better decisions, and they're not quite so vulnerable at that time.
Wow. So I know your time is just about up. So one brief question that I have, well, two brief questions. One, as soon as you get an update on what's going on in the committees, if you could have your team send us information so we can make sure that we're sending the emails or text messages or tweeting whoever we need to, so that we can get that bill passed, or at least out of committee, so that you can do your work. That would be appreciated. And then second, what's the likelihood, or are there any major challenges that you see with this legislation?
Well, you know, last session I got the bill that would prevent children from being prosecuted for prostitution out of the House and out of the Senate. And it was ultimately vetoed by the governor, which was, you know, it was a shock because we had been working, you know, with the governor's office. There was some confusion about the bill at the time. There was the governor's veto statement said that at the time they believed that the children would just be left behind. They just wouldn't be arrested and they wouldn't be prosecuted, but that nothing would be necessarily done to apprehend them and take them out of the realm of sight from the pimp or the perpetrator. So even though the bill said that at the time, we made it very clear this session with the committee substitute, very specifically that law enforcement they must take custody of the child. And we've laid out the steps piece by piece. So we look forward to working with the governor's office on this. So hopefully we can get across the finish line. But the broader answer to your question is it always helps to have tons of public support and media support. So I've got some little Post-its here. You can follow me on Facebook, and you know, I'll put out messaging on it and you share it. We know that social media things spread at the speed of light. I always tell my staff, it's not on social media, it didn't happen. So it's follow me on Facebook, State Rep Shantieri. You can follow me on Twitter, which is at Rep Theory 146. THIERRY. And then also you can go to the House of Representatives, Texas House of Representatives website. That's at house.texas.gov. And then you can put in, this is for the first bill, JJFI, Juvenile Justice Family Issues, JJFI-committee. When you go to that committee, you will see me on Monday laying out this bill. I think it is at, I'm trying to think of the time, on Monday morning. It's at 10 a.m. Monday morning. So be there, pray for me, pray for the children that will be able to benefit from this important piece of legislation. And then I would love to come back another time, or just to reach out with you all through social media when we get the hearing set for the SMART Act, and then we'll do the same thing all over again. I don't get tired from this because it is my purpose and my passion. And I just want to thank all of the ladies of Delta Sigma Theta once again for being engaged and proactive and all of the service that you do for our communities. My mom is a Delta, so very, very honored and proud to be here.
Well, thank you so much. That was a lot of really good information, and it's nice to see that there's a call to action that we can take immediately, literally immediately, to support you and to support this work. So thank you so much. I know you have to jump off, but we'll continue the conversation, and have a great evening.
Thank you. Blessings to everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, so we have two other panelists that we haven't been able to get to yet. So I'll let them, you guys are kind of tag team because we're getting some questions in the chat. I think you all are pretty equipped to answer them. So Caroline, I'll start with you first. Tell us briefly about the work that you do for children at risk. And then I have a couple of questions that were related to the legislation and lawmaking that we just discussed.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for having me tonight. It's been wonderful hearing from all of the panelists and just wonderful to talk to you. So Children at Risk is a research and advocacy nonprofit. We work on a number of different children's issues, but specifically I work in the Human Trafficking Center, and then I also work in our policy center as well. So we research a number of different issues like human trafficking, nutrition, early education, et cetera. And then we use that research, we use our collaborations with other partners, direct service providers to generate bills and find sponsors for those bills and try to get them passed and really advocate for them. So we have, you know, a great relationship with a number of different legislators and folks, stakeholders, constituents across the state. And then specifically in human trafficking, we have really focused on fighting the demand for human trafficking. So we have a program called Cease Demand, or Cease Texas, which is a partnership between a number of different cities, and it is funded out of the governor's child sex trafficking team. And we have cyber patrols that actually, they are groups of men that answer phone calls from attempted buyers. So these buyers are answering fake ads. They think that they are answering, or they are calling in for real ads, and instead they get our guys on the phone. And you know, we are not acting as law enforcement. We're acting to kind of boost law enforcement's efforts, but we are something different. And we've really taken steps to change that approach to be very, you know, not shaming, but really trying to meet the guys that are calling where they're at and say, you know, hey, what's going on in your life that you are looking to buy sex? And do you know that you could be buying a child? Do you know that, you know, women are exploited on these websites? These are all the facts about human trafficking. Do you want to change your life? Are you struggling with an addiction? Are you, you know, maybe you've gotten divorced, you're struggling with something? What can we do to help you? And since making that change, we've had guys on the phone with these buyers for 30 minutes that they then ask for an email at the end and say, hey, can you follow up with me? I really want to stop doing this. And it's just been amazing to see what our guys, our volunteers have been able to do in those conversations, and really trying to get at a larger cultural change as well through presentations, data, building coalitions in different cities that really examine the demand, and you know, dispelling the myths that it's not boys will be boys or a victimless crime, et cetera.
Yeah, that's really great work. And that kind of ties into what Sheriff Fagan mentioned earlier about kind of having people kind of stand in to mitigate some of those potential buys. Monica, I'm going to jump to you, and then Caroline, I'll come back. I'll come back to you. So Detective Fortin, tell us about some of the work that you've done as it relates to human trafficking. I know you've moved around quite a bit working for HPD, and congratulations on 10 years on the 21st working for HPD. That's a major milestone, and we've seen you move through the ranks, so we're very excited for you. Congratulations again. But tell us a little bit about about the work you do and how it relates to human trafficking.
Thank you. So I am a detective with our Special Victims Division. I started off on the adult sex crime side and work in adult sexual assaults, and I'm now on the child side. So probably about the last 6, coming up on 7 years of my career has been centered around sexual assaults and sex crimes related against adults and now children. And so I actually work out of the Children's Assessment Center right there in Rice Village. And my bigger portion, though, is training. So I'm over all of our training and curriculum for now the child side. I was on the adult side, but now the child side. And HPD officers go through a 3-day course in how to investigate sexual assaults and physical abuse against children, where they're also learning how and what to look for in children that are at risk, and children that are probably in the sex trade or can be part of that industry, and what to do when they get these calls for service. And outside of HPD, I am an instructor for Traffick. It's sexual assault and family violence. I train officers across the state of Texas in a 3-day course in how to investigate sexual assault and family violence. And I'm also one of Traffick's newer human trafficking instructors. And so I train officers in an 8-day course, a 1-day course across the state of Texas in how to investigate human trafficking and how to take this training back to their agencies and back to their communities, and what to look for and how to pair up with community resources and get on top of the human trafficking aspect of it. And so on both sides, the adult and the child side, I have come across human trafficking cases. For HPD specifically, we're such a large agency, we specifically have a unit that is human trafficking. It falls underneath our vice squad. And so they would get a lot of the major human trafficking cases. But being on the child side, we're going to come across those cases that might be just one survivor, just one child that's at risk, where we're picking up on the cues. We are in the house. They're coming to the Children's Assessment Center to get forensically interviewed. That's one thing that I do train my officers on, HPD side and outside agencies, is when you are on these calls for service and you come across our child victims, which will end up being survivors, we're not going to interview them right there on scene in death, because that trauma that you're constantly pulling back, it plays a role. And children, they do have a tendency to recant. And what you'll see in that recant statement is, I've said something that I was told not to say, not to share. I've been threatened by it. And the reaction that I've gotten has kind of been like, oh, it's upset my parents, or now this person that says they love me because they've been groomed and all they know is this behavior, now this person's going to get in trouble. So how do I get them out of trouble? I take back what I said. And so we know that that recant statement isn't necessarily true. So we'll ask the parents, what did you say? How did you respond? And we'll tell our officers, get just enough, get that statement from the adult that's on scene, because our forensic interviewers are trained to sit with that child and take in that interview from a non-leading manner and put that child in an environment where they feel safe. And so what that looks like on the human trafficking side, on the child side, is for us, it's really going to be a call out. And so we will have officers make scenes. I've made scenes before, still keeping with the confidentiality of the case, where we had reports where mom was pimping out her daughters. And she was having her daughters have customers, Johns, I don't know how graphic we say here on social media, have sex with these adults in the parking lot of the apartments. And we had several calls. So what that looked like for me is getting up out of my bed at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, which I'm perfectly fine with, and making the scene. That particular case, I took custody of the children because mom was my suspect. She had she wasn't going to bring them in for the forensic interview. She wasn't going to participate. And so I took them to Chimney Rock. They went into CPS custody immediately, and they were brought to the forensic interview the next day. And of course, our children, they were teenagers. They did not disclose. They did not want to be there, but at least they were taken out of that environment, because our officers, every scene that they make, they have to call CPS. It is in our general orders. You are to call CPS for any report. CPS has 24, 48, or 72 hours to make that scene, where we as officers, we get a lot of it delayed in our division. And so those cases that we get that they end up turning into these major human trafficking cases, we've picked them up where they are particularly really at risk, and we turn them or refer them over to our human trafficking squad so they can go even more in depth. Or we keep the case. I have a case out of Fort Bend where I kept the case because dad's girlfriend had a history of prostitution. Dad was in the game. Mom didn't provide a safe home life for that child. She was a habitual runaway. The home life was not great. And so she went to dad, and dad put her into the game. And so mom was making the reports and we had to go find the child, but it was a joint effort with our office, with DPS, who had a track record of her, with Fort Bend County Sheriffs, who had a track record with her, and now our human trafficking squad, who had already had a track record with dad's girlfriend. And so that's how we're able to pull these kids and these at-risk kids out of these situations faster when we're working jointly. And it really takes all the partners to do this work, because you have psychological needs for these children. You have physical needs for these children. And so that's kind of where my work goes and expands past the sexual abuse, past the child pornography also. It falls underneath us, where we've worked these scenes. But we really pick up on the signs early on for these children. And we work them all the way up to 16, because at 17 you can consent and it goes over to the adult side. But that's where our work starts and our work keeps going.
That's really, I mean, that's great. You guys are doing a lot, saving lives, and it's a very thorough process. Tyler, I see you doing a lot of head nods over there. Did you have anything you wanted to share or add, or any thoughts?
Yeah, I was just agreeing with a lot of what I was just agreeing with Ms. Monica on a lot of what she was saying, because we see a lot of situations as well as it pertains to young people going through trafficking. We get a lot of reports of that as well. And although you have individuals like Ms. Monica that are doing amazing things with HPD, a lot of people don't necessarily feel comfortable enough to go to law enforcement and disclose information. And so they do come to us, and we do let them know, like, hey, we can work with law enforcement for you, but we are not law enforcement. We are not a government entity. But we do see that a lot. And as she said, sometimes people don't want to disclose information out of fear, out of commitment, loyalty, whatever it may be. And so we just try to continue to build their rapport with them, and hopefully, they'll want to come around and get that assistance.
No, and that's a very good point. Like you said, some people, having other advocacy groups and shelters and places like that can maybe be kind of the middle person to ensure that somebody is kept safe if they're not quite comfortable with law enforcement. Knowing that those options are out there is very, very important. So we have a few questions, and I think everybody can kind of chime in and answer. So the first one is, are there experts on human trafficking in the same room when working on the legislature or trying to create the bill? So this question comes from when Representative Theory was talking. Caroline, I will let you go first, but I believe that Tyler or Monica may have some influence here as well. We know the work that you do directly impacts bills and legislation.
So absolutely, I think that's very, very important. And just for instance, we have a advocacy meeting fairly regularly. United Against Human Trafficking is there, and we try to, especially with direct service providers, with law enforcement, that we're always getting feedback on what their needs are. So we've definitely taken suggestions and tried to turn that into legislation in the past. We've also, one of our bills this session, it is a training for hotel employees and signage for hotel employees. And that was passed as a city ordinance in Houston. And so we worked with the city and with the city's experts, Neil Davis and Chris, and through our work with them, we thought, hey, let's get this passed at the state as well. This is a great thing. So there are lots and lots of examples of folks getting together, and we really, really welcome hearing, not just from the experts, but also from interested, people out there that have taken an interest, maybe have had experience. Definitely survivors is that is an incredibly important voice to include. But anytime that anyone wants to reach out and talk about legislation, we're very, very open to it.
Absolutely. Tyler or Monica, anything to add there? Monica, anything that the police departments are influencing?
Yeah, so naturally we have unions. And so I'm actually stepping down from my position on our African American Police Officer League, but you'll see the unions get behind things. But I think when we think and we say expert, it kind of says, okay, what do you mean by expert? Because everybody that is joining this team is an expert in their own field that contributes to pushing these bills through. Your survivors are experts. They can tell you what it is like to literally live this life day by day. Your law enforcement officers work the cases are experts. They're going to tell you what it means to prosecute these cases. Your judges, your DAs, your advocacy offices, everyone's going to have a different perspective and bring their expertise. So when you ask, are there experts in the room? Yes, we are. We are in the room and we are working as a team to get these bills and this legislation through. What we need is the support from the community that surrounds us, because we cannot do it without you guys. If it's just our voices, it's easy to overlook. But when you have voters that say, hey, guess what? You need me to stay in that office, and I'm going to get everybody else around me to say, you need me, and this is what we're backing because we voted you in, and this is what we want you to do. It's easier for us to keep doing our job.
No, that's really good to hear. And I think people will be relieved to know that it's not just a bunch of lawmakers in the room. Unfortunately, sometimes with politics, I think the way things can be portrayed is that it's just, the lawmakers are there just making up stuff, right? And that's not always the case. More likely than not, somebody's in the room that has some type of knowledge that can help support. So the next question is, what conflicts or challenges, if any, does the sex worker industry pose in the fight against human trafficking? So we do know that there are some individuals that is the life that they choose, but it can get really messy when it's mixed in with people who don't choose that life. So how do we kind of address that, or what kind of challenges outside of, that generic statement do you all see? And this question is for anyone.
I think with the sex trade industry, honestly, if you go back to women or men that choose the lifestyle and you really delve into their history and their childhood, you're going to see some type of trauma. A lot of people that enter into this industry, and I'm not going to say all, but a lot, have experienced some type of sexual abuse as a child, or some type of abuse or trauma. They've grown up in the household, they've seen it, and this is what they know. And so they go into it. And I think for us on the law enforcement side, it's a hard time because sometimes the trafficking life is better than the life that you have to go back to. And if you think of, if you remove me out of here, you're taking me away from somebody that has provided me with shelter, food, clothing, and you're going to put me back into a place where what? Especially for our young kids, where I'm being abused at home, but my trafficker isn't really abusing me, right? My trafficker is loving on me, because you have two different types of traffickers that really fall underneath pimps. You have your Romeos and you have your gorillas. And so when you look at that terminology, you have your Romeo pimps that are going to be that loving boyfriend, that are going to be, I love you so much. How about you just sleep with just one of my friends? How about you do this? How about you do that? Let me reward you with Jordans. Let me reward you with this. Let me reward you with that. I saw your home life wasn't that great. Let me provide you this outlet, because I'm never going to put my hands on you. I'm never going to do this. I'm never going to do that. And by the time these young kids are sucked in and it changes, because it's going to change, they're already there. And then you deal with the psychological aspect of embarrassment, of shame, of not wanting to go back and tell the families, this is what I've experienced, just like a sexual assault victim, because truly they're sexually assaulted over and over and over again. And so that is some of the things that we face is just breaking down that barrier of guilt and shame, and saying, we can help you get out, but you're going to have to do your part also. And a lot of them have lost faith in the system because they've seen their pimps arrested. They turn around, they get out, and they get beat even worse because they're the reason why they lost money for the day. They're the reason why they've gone to jail. So now you got to make up the money that I had to spend to get myself out of jail. You got to get out there and you got to make it up. And so that is a lot of the challenges that you will see.
Wow.
Just to add on to that really quickly, I think sometimes the tough conversation that we don't always have is that the preventing those vulnerabilities in children, and that is expensive, that is hard. Preventing, the hunger, the abuse, the neglect, the lack of self-esteem, the racism, the sexism. We need to look at it through a gender and racial equity lens as well. But that's all. It's the long-term change, but it's the more difficult change as well. But I think that's really what's going to, in the end, make the difference for preventing that, not just the human trafficking, but that kind of sexual exploitation of, kids and young adults engaging in survival sex, for example.
And to add, to add on to what Ms. Fortson and what Ms. Roberts said, a lot of those systemic inequalities that people face, such as lack of quality education, lack of housing, and losing faith in the criminal justice system, leads them to the commercial sex world. And so, especially as it relates to the criminal justice system and losing faith in that, as Representative Theory was saying, a minor can get arrested for commercial sex when most of the time they're not even old enough to consent to sex. And so it really plays into, a lot of those systemic inequalities that they face. So we do first need to address those issues. And I do think that can help alleviate a lot of that commercial sex that's taking place, which of course a lot of times resorts to or ends up being trafficking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are two really good points. But Caroline, what you just said is, it's expensive to keep all the children in safe, warm, healthy conditions. And that's a whole nother topic that we are not going to address today. But when you think about it like that, it makes you a little bit sad. And it also it kind of helps you understand, even though it's obviously not fair, and it's really unfortunate that we don't put our resources behind just making sure that children don't have to suffer to the extent that we can, right? Next question. So Monica, I think you mentioned the family member that was exploiting her child. How prevalent is human trafficking within families?
You see it quite a bit, honestly, and it can be like a cousin or a parent that has been outside the home, that's now coming back into the home. More so fathers who have already had that life, or moms who have been in the game. They've been in the game, they've lived that lifestyle, and so they are grooming their daughters for the same type of lifestyle, because that's what mom knows, that's what daughter knows, and she's going to follow in those exact same footsteps. I think one of the statistics, it's been a little bit, but looking at NCMEC, a lot of our trafficking is not international. It is here. It's homegrown. It's coming from children that have been in state custody that run away, and children that are here, part of the US. And there's this false reality that you have no homegrown human trafficking. We're bringing in international, like Taken, that movie. That's not our reality that we live in. The reality that we live in is sitting in Shadow Creek in my house, and my neighbor next door has a teenager that has now fallen in love with somebody that she's met on the internet, who portrays themselves as another 14-year-old boy. And she goes to the movies to meet up with them and tells mom, I'm meeting up with my girlfriends from school. She meets up with this 15-year-old who's like, oh yeah, I can give you a ride home. And sitting in the driver's seat is the trafficker that's now used the 15-year-old to pull in another person. It's the reality that my teenage daughter has a new girl that's come to school who she's befriended now, who's a little bit on the more wild side, but she's inviting her to a party because her older cousin is throwing it. And she goes to the party and now she's being part of the game and she's being groomed because the traffickers are learning. They're learning if they're going after the kids themselves, they're going to get in a lot more trouble and face more jail time than if they're using kids their own age that they're trying to bring in. So what better way to keep your commodity and your income coming than using the teenagers that are in the schools already, that are in the classrooms already, that see these victims day to day and that can pinpoint, oh yeah, Sarah just broke up with her boyfriend. She's really sad. Oh, let me just bring her over. That's the reality that we're living in now. It's not the white van that we said earlier. It's not the let me just throw you in out the bushes. That's not our reality. Our reality is your child's best friend might be working for a trafficker.
Most people don't even think about that. I think a lot of parents, especially parents that are still learning about trafficking, we're trying to make the shift from the white van to your child's friend. It's like it's a totally different mind shift. So we have a few more minutes here, so I'm going to allow everyone to do their final thoughts and comments. Monica, I'll start with you, and then we'll go Caroline and Tyler, and I'll have just a final question for each of you, just kind of based off of what you all have discussed with us this evening. So Monica, I want you to elaborate a little bit more on some of the new tactics that traffickers are doing. You started talking about some of it as it relates to friends. We've heard something about social media and the internet, but are there any other warning signs that we should be looking for in traffickers and buyers and with our youth?
Yeah, what you're seeing technology-wise is what you're going to see using trafficking-wise. And I think I said in one of our teen talks, if you live at home with your parents, you don't have privacy in the privacy of their own home. So the biggest thing is for parents to really pay attention, be nosy. It's okay to be old school nosy. It's okay to tell your teenager or your kid, you can't have a password on your cell phone. I'm going to take your cell phone every single night. You can't have a computer in your room. I need to meet your friends. I need to see them. I need to meet their parents. I need to know where you're going. Yes, I'm going to have GPS on your cell phone. Yes, I'm going to be reading through your stuff, because that is, I think now I'm 36, about to be 37, I think, here next week. I see a shift, especially in the 10 years that I've been on the department, where parents have moved from a parenting and nosy, and rightfully so nosy, to a friendship where they don't want to upset their kids. But not upsetting is putting them at risk, right? And so be nosy, know who your child is around, know who is siblings, who his family, who is connected to these friends that your kids have. And if they get mad at you, oh well, be mad. You just gonna have to be mad at mom and dad. You just gonna have to get over. You're gonna have to be grounded. It is what it is, because you don't have privacy outside the privacy that I give you, period. And like Sheriff Fagan was saying earlier, for the community, be aware of your neighbors. Not even just traffic, foot traffic that's going through, car traffic. Look for the bars. If you go inside your neighbor's house and you see a whole bunch of shoes at the front door, or you're looking and you see that there's outside locks on bedroom doors, pay attention to that kind of stuff. It's those little cues that you might not necessarily pick up on in the beginning, but if you start looking around and you're like, okay, so a bunch of males live here, but I'm seeing some teenage girl clothing. Or you're like, this is an older gentleman, but why does he have a lot of toys? He doesn't have children. He doesn't have stepkids. He's not like grandpa next door. Start looking at that kind of stuff, because that's part of the grooming process. And just kind of watching that kind of stuff, and then report it. Report everything. It might take us a little while to get there. We've got like 50 plus people in my unit alone, and it's still not enough. And we're still working with outside agencies. And don't be afraid to report it, because like Tyler was saying and Caroline was saying, not everybody's safety is through law enforcement. And a lot of times the uniform is scary. And so they don't want to tell us, but they will more than welcome tell a Tyler or tell a Caroline.
Those are some great final thoughts. Again, you all have just been really, really amazing this evening. Caroline, to you. So knowing that Children at Risk is focusing on buyers now, what kind of message, or what do you want people to know about the buyers in their communities or in their families? Or if we have any people watching right now or watch this later that have been purchasers of sex or don't think that it's a victimless crime, give us your final thoughts about that.
Sure. So one thing I think to think about is that without traffickers, there would still be victims of sexual exploitation. There would still be people out there that are not really given a choice like we were talking about. But without buyers, there wouldn't be victims. So, I think that's one way to really think about why we focus so much on those buyers. And then the other kind of big takeaways, buyers of sex in comparison to men who have never bought sex are more likely to be physically violent and sexually violent. A lot of the survivors that we have worked with, they have said that, the worst violence that they ever experienced was at the hands of buyers, not the traffickers. I think that the recent Atlanta shooting is an example of the violence that can result from buyers of sex. Also, having unfortunately read through a number of buyer forums, these guys are really trying to normalize it to one another. So when you look at buyers talking to one another, they say, hey, all guys do this. We're the only ones that will admit it. But when you look at the actual numbers, it's not the case. In a Houston survey, 12% of men in the last year have bought sex, which is more than we want, but it is still not the majority. And a third of men said in the ideal situation, they would buy sex. Again, way more men than we want to say that, but 2/3 of men would not buy sex, even if they were in, the ideal situation to get away with it. So it is not the norm. We must change the culture. We must talk about the exploitation, the vulnerabilities, all of the things that lead to exploitation, human trafficking. And we also need men helping other men to see these things, to talk to them, to support them, but also to really hold them accountable at the same time.
Now, those are some great final words. And those percentages, like you said, it's kind of bittersweet, right? It's not everybody, it's not a majority, but it's still way too many. So thank you, Caroline. Tyler, your thoughts. So you work mainly in outreach, or the organization works mainly with outreach. And so what are some of the biggest challenges, and how can people in the community support the work that you do?
Challenges, that's a big one, because I feel like it's so many, and it really varies depending on what area you're in, who you're talking to. But there are three main challenges that we face. And if people could talk about it a little bit more, the first one is the negative stigma associated with just talking about it. A lot of people, they shy away from it. They don't want to talk about it. Oh, we don't talk about those things. It's just one of those things that's kind of brushed under the rug. Even if they do know that it's taking place, they're just nervous to talk about it. But you can do great things just by being uncomfortable. Sometimes you're going to have uncomfortable conversations about real things. And that's something that a lot of the communities that we go out into, that they don't understand. They don't want to have that uncomfortable conversation. They don't want to think about their son, daughter, sister, brother actually being possibly trafficked. They don't want to think about those type of things. Another challenge that we face is just disbelief. A lot of people don't believe that that happens here. They don't believe that it happens in Houston, Harris County, Fort Bend. They just don't think that it happens here. They think that there's something that happens in, I don't know, Mexico, or one of these third world developing countries or something like that, and they just can't wrap their mind around the fact that it does happen here. So it's like, if it doesn't happen here, why do you want to talk to me about human trafficking? And the third one is just fear. A lot of people do think sometimes that we're law enforcement, and a lot of people are afraid of law enforcement. So that's why we always try to let them know, like, hey, we aren't law enforcement or a government agency. We are a nonprofit that's not associated with it. And so, but if you do want to be connected with them, we still can get you there with them, because we do know that all law enforcement isn't bad law enforcement, but they're just fearful, especially when we speak to day laborers. And that's something that I don't think we spoke a lot about, is labor trafficking. We spoke more about sex trafficking, but when we go out there to try to do education about labor trafficking, especially with day laborers, a lot of them are non-citizens. And so when we come to them talking to them about labor trafficking and their rights, a lot of times they don't know that they have rights. And a lot of times, again, they think that we may be with ICE, or we're trying to get them deported, or if they make a report in regards to labor trafficking, that as a consequence of that they may get deported. And so it's a lot of fear behind it as well. People just, when they think of human trafficking, is just a very fearful thing, and they don't want to talk about it. So those are some of those main challenges. And just like Ms. Fortson was talking about some of the signs of sex trafficking when you go into homes and stuff like that, you can look for some of those things in labor trafficking as well, even in some of the restaurants you go to. And a lot of people don't think about that. If you go into a restaurant and you see way too many cameras or something like that, of course, a normal restaurant is going to have some cameras, but if it's way too many, they may have a lot of cameras because they're trying to keep surveillance on their employees and make sure they're not trying to escape out of the building. You may have a server or a bus boy or something like that you may see, and you may speak to them. They really don't want to make eye contact. They may look like they haven't eaten in a minute. They may have certain brandings on them. They may not have a name tag because the employer doesn't want them to be identifiable, things like that. Just looking for those type of things, you can tell if someone may be being trafficked possibly or not. And you can make these tips. It's also worth noting to the public that you can make these tips anonymously. So you don't have to reveal yourself. You can just leave the information, the place, when it took place, and things like that. So you don't have to worry about your information being published.
That's a perfect segue to one, ending, but two, if we can get our slide up with the information on who to call or who to text, because all of you guys have mentioned in some form or another, tell somebody. Well, some people are asking, who do you tell? Where do I go? The information is on your screen right now. The National Human Trafficking Hotline, the phone number is listed, 1-888-373-7888. And you can also text HELP to 233-733. I have these numbers saved in my phone, and I have used them on a couple of occasions. And so this is a great way for our audience and for people to share. We can still be vigilant. And if we suspect something, this is not calling the police. They're going to take this information down. They're going to be looking for patterns in certain areas or restaurants and things like that. And they'll do the proper assessment and reach out to individuals like Tyler, Caroline, and Monica to make sure that this issue is addressed. So again, 1-888-373-7888, or text HELP to 233-733. And with that, I want to thank you all. Tyler, you have one more thing you want to add? Go ahead.
I was just about to say, for people, it doesn't matter the time of the day, if it's a holiday, Christmas, Thanksgiving, any of that. The National Human Trafficking Hotline operates 24/7, 365, and they speak over 200 different languages. So if you think there may be a language barrier, there's somebody there on that hotline that can speak to you.
Great point. Great point. That's good information. So I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. It was a great conversation. We got a lot of knowledge. I learned quite a few things this evening. I hope our audience did as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our president. She has a presentation for us. But before I do that, I do want to announce this was part one. We have part two on Saturday. That is for the youth. And United Against Human Trafficking will be joining us again at 10 a.m. Registration is required for our youth. The link is on your screen now, hmac.org/human trafficking. Teens will register. You'll receive a form to a permission slip, if you will, and they can attend that event. We'll be talking about some of the cybersecurity and training for youth. And we'll also have a survivor of human trafficking and an advocate talk about her experiences as well. Our partners are Top Ladies of Distinction, the Lake Houston chapter and the Houston chapter, as well as Top Teens of America with those same chapters. So we're looking forward to seeing you all, or sending your teens or anyone you know to join us on Saturday. And with that, I'm going to sign off. President Lacey, turning it over to you.
Thank you all so much. This was incredibly informative. There's a lot of information that even I needed to digest and really wrap my mind around and see where I fit in the fight against human trafficking. We in HMAC, we want to extend. We don't want to just talk about it and then this is the end of the conversation. We want to extend further. And so what we are trying to do is make sure that we can also financially support organizations in the city that are doing this same type of work on a regular basis. And so I am not sure if I'm going to have some checks because I don't have any checks with me right now, but I really want to make sure that our friends at the Houston Area Women's Center, Hawk, and the Fort Bend County Women's Center, FBCWC, I want to make sure that they know that we are supporting them in their efforts in this as well. Both of these organizations have been fighting for women and children for a very long time. And without them and the work that they do, we would not have these safer communities and more empowered women. So we want to really, really try to support these organizations. And if anybody is listening, if you want to support any one of the organizations that we've named here tonight, some of the speakers that are here, feel free to do so. We cannot do this work. These organizations cannot do this work without your support. So I thank everyone for being on board with us tonight. I'm looking forward to our Saturday part 2 session, and we thank you all for joining us. Everyone have a good evening.